Good evening. You just watched a little clip there of what we did with all those fields of barley and wild oats. We put that immediately to work, made a lot of silage out of it. You can see the silage trucks backing in. We have several thousand tons of silage to feed the cows that we run on this ranch. Jesus said, if you remember, Peter said one day, I'm going to go fishing in John chapter 21. And Jesus said, well, listen, if you love me, I want you to feed my sheep. Says that to him 3 times. In 1 Peter chapter 5, as Peter ends his career, he says one of the last things he says to his people is, feed the flock of God which is among you. So those are admonitions that we have in scriptures to, I'm in the cow business, I have to feed them. He said, God says, I want you to feed my sheep as well. So what should we feed them? What are we supposed to feed? I know what I'm going to feed those cows. What are we supposed to feed the sheep? Well, several passages back in 1 Peter chapter 2, he says this, as newborn babes desire the pure milk of the word that you might grow by it. So the new Christian needs the milk of the word. But again, it's scripture. It's the very basic, fundamental stuff that scripture teaches. That's what the new believer says, but needs. But in Hebrews chapter 5, the author of Hebrews says this, everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongs to those who are of a full age, even to those who by reason of use have their senses exercised, discern both good and evil. That's the last verses of Hebrews chapter 5. So the new believer needs milk. The older believer needs to get into the doctrinal issues, into the serious stuff, the deeper things of Scripture. But again, it all comes back to the Scripture and the need that man cannot live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. So if you're involved in this business, you are responsible to feed somebody. And as I'm in the cow business, I have to feed those cows, and I want them fat. So we put up we have several thousand tons of really good size to feed our cows this winter. They're going to winter well. Are the people you're feeding, are they going to be skinny or fat come next spring, depending on the feed that you give them and how much you give them? Second of all, second thing I want to say is that he says this to those of us involved in this business, and that would be everybody. You have somebody who's looking up to you that you can feed. And he says this, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing, again, the word of truth. So again, he says, this is going to involve work. He says, I'm writing to the workman. He says, study to show yourself approved. If you're going to have, it took a lot of work and a lot of labor. It took 11 guys, several hours to put up several thousand tons of silage, but it was a lot of work. Getting your heart ready to feed other people is going to involve the study and the work and having something to say and something to share with people that are depending on you. Study to show yourself approved unto God. And then last of all, he says this, as God presents his word to a man named Moses, he said this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein, for then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. So he says, the last of all, he says, the word that I've given you, I want you to meditate that. I want you to think about that. I want you to make it your own, and then you'll have something to teach. So, one more time, the issue being, if you're a new believer, when God says, feed my sheep, he says, give the new believer milk. Give the old believer some solid meat that he can chew on. And let me say this to you, if you've been around for a while and you're still on milk, that's too bad. That's very unfortunate. You need to get deeper into the Word to where you can handle strong meat. And second of all, he says this is going to require work. The workman that needeth not to be ashamed, that when you get ready to feed somebody out there, you're not ashamed. Say, I have nothing to feed you. I have nothing to give you. I have nothing to share with you. And then last of all, he says, meditate on the book. Meditate on the word. Let it become part of you. And then he says, you'll have something to share. Mulțumesc pentru atenție. That means in Romanian, thank you for listening, and God bless you. Bye then.